want to welcome all of you to the Wednesday study. And Chuck, I wanted to particularly commend you for that prayer that you just offered from Colossians chapter 1. And it's one of the 4 life-changing prayers of Paul. In my Friday morning group, some of the men have committed to memorizing this by June 30th. It's a date that one of the men came up with, and some of them took as challenge. And that wouldn't be a bad exercise for your consideration. You will never regret learning these great prayers because they're life transformative in so many ways. And ultimately, as we learn the scriptures and apply it, then we begin to discover that the things that we've hidden in our hearts are the ones that will serve us well in times of temptation. At any rate, let's pick up where we've left off. And again, to give you context here, when I go to the Wednesday morning study, we go back and forth. And last week we did Romans 7. Before that, though, it's this alternation. It was Joshua. And there we had been, we were looking on Joshua chapter 3 on relying on God. And again, this is a little summary of this material. So it's always helpful to realize that if there's something that you missed or whatever, or if you want to get an image, you can always go back to this and find it in that manner. So going back to that, then we can see we're up to Joshua chapter 4 now. And here's where we see the Lord instructing Joshua to memorialize. And this is going to be a theme I want us to emphasize in our time this morning. What does it mean to memorialize? Memorialize the miraculous crossing of the Jordan River. How do we memorialize the works of God in our own life journeys? And we'll talk about that. I think it'll be great. But it was on dry ground. And so this miraculous movement, and as we saw before, God doesn't do the same thing in the same way. He keeps modifying because he's the God of infinite variety and purpose. And so just as Moses then, as the waters parted, so it would with Joshua, but Moses did not have to go in, Joshua and the priests did. It's just a different way in which he manifested himself in specific manners for specific times and purposes. But you see, representatives were chosen from each of the 12 tribes. And you'll recall before there were representatives from those 12 tribes that were chosen many years ago, 38 years ago at Kadesh Barnea. And those people then had failed to actually believe God. And in this case now, this new generation who saw the failures of their parents and the remorse and regret of them having missed out on the opportunity that they were invited to become not just the generation of the Exodus, they were invited to become the generation of the conquest, and they missed that opportunity and consigned themselves to the futility of wandering literally in circles for 38 years. So this new generation then would not fail to obey God because they saw the consequences, and their parents would have told them, prior to their deaths, do not do what we did. Do not make that blunder. Obedience to God is the only way in which you're going to truly flourish. And it's a lesson that we need to have. Well, in this case then, these tribes, everyone knew effectively in terms of being 20 years old and over had perished. So anyone who was older for that previous generation was gone. But these were people, and many of them would have remembered the Exodus and the wilderness experiences because some of them were up to 19 years old. So they would remember this, and they were to carry a stone. And there was a symbolic movement here to take a stone from the midst of the Jordan riverbed, and they're going to take it to a place called Gilgal. And we've seen this before when we were talking about Deuteronomy, especially chapters 27 and 8, the blessings and cursings and Ebal associated with that and with Gilgal. And so this would be beyond the western shore. So they're about to make this movement here for the conquest of the land. And the stones then, in this way, would be a sign to the generations to follow. You see, this is the whole idea that your life, in my view, is meant to be the same in this sense that you build these ebenezers, these stones of remembrance, and you build a sacred history. And part of our life calling is to transmit that wisdom, that hard-earned insight that we've gained through obedience and then the mistakes of disobedience and what we've learned from that. And to transmit it to the next generation, to be people who can convey that to another generation. And so this is the whole notion here. So they set up these 12 stones then, these representative stones, in the midst of the Jordan as well. So they would actually carry them and to Gilgal, but then another 12 stones they put in the midst of the Jordan before the waters returned. And then, as it says, when the priest came up from the riverbed, that's when the waters of Jordan returned. And again, this was the time of year when the Jordan overflowed its banks. And in this manner, then, Joshua's authority was permanently established among the people. And so you see this in our text, just having a look at this. When all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua, "Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, one man from each tribe," because you'll recall then that the ones who would then settle on the Transjordan, they would then go with them until the conquest of the land, and then they would go to their settlements on the east of the Jordan. And it says, command them, these 12 stones from here, out of the middle of the Jordan, you're going to take them, and you're going to take them from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm, because you see the water was being held up there, and it became dry ground. And carry them over with you. Lay them down in the lodging place where you will lodge tonight. So these are stones of remembrance. So Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, one man from each tribe, this representative again, this notion then that each tribe is a part of this whole. And this is why you had the images of the tribes and the 12 stones in the breastplate of the high priest, who would represent them as he would go once a year into the Sanctum Sanctorum, the Holy of Holies, and offer on that Day of Atonement then the sacrifice that would put off the debt for yet another year. And that because the blood of bulls and goats can never actually pay for it, but it can put off the debt until the Son of God, the Lamb of God, he'd be the one who'd take upon himself the sins of the world. So all these things then are meant to memorialize these critical events in their lives. And we do well, as I'll be saying, to do the same. So he said to them, cross again to the ark of the Lord, your God, into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you take up a stone on his shoulder. So you're going to have these two sets of 12 then. Stones will be removed and stones that will remain there as markers. And you're going to, according to this then, this is going to be when your children ask later, what do these stones mean to you? That reminds me of a book I read in seminary. What mean these stones, to use the King James? What mean these stones? It was a book on biblical archaeology, so it was a clever little take. Then you will say to them, here's what these stones mean. Because the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And we all witnessed it then. So this is a time when representatives of all the tribes then, we were all there, and we went across, and we saw it with our own eyes. And when it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. They become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. Thus the sons of Israel did as Joshua commanded, and they took up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, just as the Lord spoke to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of sons of Israel, and they carried them over with them to the lodging place and put them down there. And then the other 12 stones, Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, at the place where the feet of the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing. And they are there to this day. I've not really looked into this, but I was wondering if there had ever been any kind of a quest to try to find that pile of stones, because when it was said it was there to this day. And then you wonder, it seems to me that they'd still be there, but I don't know. I haven't looked into that. It'd be an intriguing thought. But at any rate, the priests who carried the ark, everything was completed. The Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people. So all these things were noteworthy events that were to be marked down, to be written, to be memorialized, to be recalled, to be transferred from generation to generation. So again, he did according, in this wonderful phrase that recurs, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. This is a very important theme that you see in the Torah, because when it describes, for example, in the book of Exodus and also in Deuteronomy, that they would do according to everything that he said to do when they were, for example, fabricating the components of the tabernacle. And it was exactly according to the instructions that were given. And there was no variation. And when you look at those instructions, you see an incredible confluence of three things, what are called the transcendentals, of goodness, of truth, and of beauty. And that beauty dimension really shows that there is a form as well as function, and that there was an elegance and a beauty that things that we do as unto the Lord should be done then in that spirit then of goodness and truth and beauty. At any rate, this was a marker, a memorial. And so the ark of the Lord and the priests then crossed before the people, the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Those were the ones who would then settle on the Transjordan. It says about 40,000 equipped for war. They crossed for battle before the Lord of the desert plains of Jericho. That was a decisive moment for them. The awful moment of effectively leaving their loved ones, their wives, their children, leaving them in that land and going over to conquer the land is going to be what's required to do. It's going to be a very difficult process for them to actually trust the Lord that he's going to take care of them even when the conquest is complete. And so they went across. It tells us on this that on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, so that they revered him just as they had revered Moses all the days of his life. I think that one of the things you will find in common with both Moses and Joshua is both of them had a hunger and a thirst, an appetite for the things of God. When it tells us about Joshua, our first encounter with him, it says Joshua, after Moses would leave the tent of meeting, when he would have his encounters before God, Joshua, it says, a young man would not depart from the tent. Something about him had an appetite for the things of God. And both of them, I think, also similarly had a very real and rich, not only hunger for knowing God, but a real humility because they did know God, they realized that everything comes from him and through him and to him. And it's this knowledge that then is, in my mind, what people have discovered is the key to humility. And I think this is true. When Andrew Murray wrote his book on humility, you'd think, how could you write about humility without supposing then that you are humble and the problem is you're humble and proud of it, or your humility cries for recognition. And the key is never, never to try to become humble, because that'll lead to perverse and false forms of pride, like Uriah Heep and David Copperfield. No. The real key to humility is 1 Corinthians 4:7. What do you have that you did not receive? And that rhetorical question invites us to say, nothing I have that wasn't given to me. Then why do you boast as if you hadn't received it? So at the moment you finally come to admit that every good that you possess is derivative from the hand of God, everything is gift and grace. That, I see it as the basis for humility. You have nothing to boast about, because everything was given to you. And in fact, to whom much is given, much will be required, because we are, in fact, as we know in Scripture, we are not only ambassadors on the king's business, not our own, but we're also stewards who are managing the resources, the possessions of another. They are not our own. Whatever we keep for ourselves is still the Lord's. Everything is his, 100% ownership, and therefore 100% stewardship. So it's a mindset then that we are going to be accountable before God. And this is one of the things I think that Moses and Joshua had very clearly in common, and God honored them in this way. So the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony that they come up from the Jordan. So at this point then, this is a noteworthy mark, because the people have now gone across all these, this massive number of people, and then they all witness this event together. And it comes about when the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord had come up from the middle of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up to the dry ground. At that moment, it tells us that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and went over its banks as before. Now that'll get your attention. When you see the water held back, and then at that precise moment when the last of them touched the bank, then the water comes upon them. That's a sign that that generation would never forget. So these people had seen these things, but then another generation would come who had not seen the works of God. And so it tells us later on in the book of Judges. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho. Those 12 stones which they had taken from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal, and he said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in the ages and the time to come, then you will inform your children. Then Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. So he dried up us before until we had crossed the peoples. And there's a parallel, just as your Lord God had done to the Red Sea. So there's a clear connection of the previous generation under the leadership of Moses and this current generation under the leadership then of Joshua. And both are authenticated as God's person for that time. And so the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. This is a major motif as we see. Fearing God, putting your sense of trust and reverential awe in him is so critical. We saw when we were looking at Deuteronomy that in Deuteronomy chapter 27 and 28, it related to this matter of the blessings and cursings formula. So we go back to that for just a moment. And in Deuteronomy 27, then, what we see is the beginnings of where it talks about the curses of Mount Ebal. And then as we go down from there, and this was a prediction that this is what you're going to be doing, this is what you're going to be saying, and then blessings at Gerizim. And we saw, if we look at the map here, that Mount Gerizim would be here, you see, in the center here. And then you would have this area of Ebal right up here. So you have Ebal, and then you have Gerizim, and the town of Shechem. By the way, this is a town that still is a city that still exists. It would be in between those areas, and so the blessings and the cursings would then be between this portion on the top here and the portion on the bottom. So if we can see what this looks like, Mount Gerizim, then, and then associated with one, and then the other mountain across the way, Mount Ebal. And I had the opportunity to be a part of a tour where we saw that. And this was a pretty, Tim Peterson, are you with us this morning? I just out of curiosity, because you'd be a great guide for this, because you were among us as we went across here into this area that was really not owned by Israel. This is the East Bank, so we had to be brought through, and we had a military presence in our midst, so that we could go to this area that would normally not be visited on tours. And the area that we visited was, in fact, the very probable locale of where this altar then would also be built, because after they came out, they would build an altar of uncut stones. And so as we went and walked on that journey here, this is what it looked like when we first saw it from the distance. And it seems to be very good evidence, we'll go into these things here, that this altar, as we can see it here, and there were no other areas of previous digs. There was no evidence of any kind of thing below that surface. This is an area that has not really been fully explored, but it would look like this. You see this altar that we would have. And we were privileged to see that. And so that was very near as we went from this area here. And you could look over and see Shechem in the distance, and so the city of Shechem. And see, this is it right here. So this just gives you a perspective here of what that was like, and the historical dynamics of that are always intriguing to me. That we can see these things occurred in space-time history. This is not just some kind of a nebulous, long ago and far away thing, but there's very clear, consistent archaeological records, and the more we get, the more it confirms the historical veracity of the scriptures. The thing I wanted to comment about, though, in this, as I really reflected about this memorializing, is this whole idea of your own life journey and what does that look like and how do you recalibrate in your own life? Um, Jenny Abel and I are working on a book. It was called Transitioning Well, but we're now considering calling it Recalibrate because we didn't want it to just be limited to one part of life, but to really explore it in a broader sense. So the question is going to be, where do I go from here? And a guide to transitioning through life stages with eternity in view. So we decided to break it up now into two parts. The first part, midlife, and living today without regrets tomorrow. And then the second part, retirement years, living with purpose until God calls you home. And you'll also notice that there is a parallel here, perspective, purpose, stewardship, legacy, in that area, and then the same perspective, purpose, stewardship, and then legacy here. So we do well to realize, don't wait till you are heading toward retirement to ask these questions. Although even if you do not really wrestle with them until then, it's still possible for you to live with purpose and make the best years of your life the ones that are before you. Because for those who are about to enter those years, the end of life seems much closer. And of course, there's a temptation, as we say, to coast or to dwell in the past or to drop out of the race. And I've seen this so often. People tempted to do that. No. This is the time when all those insights, hard-earned insights, have been forged in you. It's fine time for you now to be a generational link and for you also to end the journey with excellence, to finish well. What does that look like? In fact, one of the components of this is going to be 7 keys to living and finishing well, a crowning tool in the toolkit, because we're going to have various tools we want to give people to use. So we're working on that right now. So it's very important for us to see then that we have this whole life journey before us. So, for example, we say usually around our mid-30s to early 40s, our mortality hits us. The way I sometimes like to describe it is age conspires with God to transfer our hope from the temporal to the eternal. And if we're smart, we realize that what the morbidity of decrepitude, the fact that we birth, growth, decay, and death is an inevitability, and the older you get, the realization increases with the apprehension of how rapidly the years really do zoom by. It's an astonishment. And then you ask the question, how did this happen? The wise thing then is actually to gain perspective and look back into the past and gain an insight. So, but if we are smart, we'll do this earlier as well. This so-called midlife process is, instead of a crisis, is the way to see it. Usually between about the ages of 38 to 45, we become aware of that mortality. And with intentionality and prayer, what we want to do is stop putting off, but start thinking now about that. You don't want to lead to regret over wasted time and wasted opportunity. So recalibrate. How do you get a perspective on your life, your work, your family life, and what you think of as retirement? What is your purpose in being on this planet? In a broader sense than just that transcends career. It really relates to vocation, your vocare, your calling, which transcends your career. What do I see about the resources that God's given me and what legacy? This isn't just for older people, but then when we do get in the retirement years, it's good then for us to recognize then that you do not want to coast, again, reminisce and live on the good old days of the past or drop out of the race. So many people then, I think, can do so. But instead, the key is going to be intentionality, that what you intend, what you long for, what you choose. These could be some of your most rewarding and fruitful times, especially even when those who are experiencing physical limitations or challenges, because if we can gain a perspective again, a biblical sense of purpose as we reflect stewardship and finances, what is my legacy? So what we're, I think, going to be the most important part about this will be a kind of a toolkit. And some of those components will include a guide to taking a retreat with God. And then, we recommend this taken annually, if not more frequently. But then also a collection of tools and exercises that will be the same for the 2 life stages. Those are more apropos for midlife and more for retirement years. And so, in this whole idea of a toolkit here, we're talking about this idea of a recalibrate, even like having a recalibrate retreat. And how would you spend a day with God to recognize what are those memorial stones that have been placed in my life? As I look back then, it's the stones of remembrance. What is, you want to develop a sacred memory. And so we're actually creating a guide that's going to give you not only how to prepare for it, but what your schedule would be, you see. And it's this way, at least you can not just be random and arbitrary, but you want to have a clear guide. Here's how do you do this? Let's take you by the hand. And the goal for our first hour, the backward look, and then you take after the first hour the backward look. Then you have the second hour is going to be the upward look, and you spend time connecting with God here, and you focus on in His presence and the being dynamics, and we give specific suggestions as to how to use this time. And then there's a third hour, the inward look. So you go with the backward look, looking back in the past. You're looking upward. It's the upward and inward look. So now you're considering an honest self-assessment to be reminded of your identity, your security. Who are you? What is your assessment of your own life journey? And then the fourth hour would be the forward look, looking to the future to determine what kind of needed mid-course adjustments. How do I allow my destination to define the journey? So this becomes an important discipline for us as well. And then we're envisioning or planning and acting, guiding principles that we've got here. So I'm really looking forward to getting this, and then making it annual for this. So what does that look like? For more frequent retreats, you'd have modifications. So that can be a helpful resource, I hope, for people in this process. So we're expecting to get that done. But we have to get that done to submit the manuscript to InterVarsity Press in October of this year. So this is a very important theme. And so as I look at these themes then of what it means to recalibrate, what it means to gain a perspective, where are you in your journey? Most people, you see, seem to react. They're not proactive, they're reactive, and they just react to things that happen to them. But you, in this context, need to have an intentionality where you have a conscious sense of purpose and direction, because you are defined by your choices. It's not just what you think your priorities are, but what you choose, how you choose to spend your time and your resources, your energy and all. You're going to invest in something. It's what you choose and how you choose that reveals what your true priorities, where your true heart is. So your life then is woven out of these choices that we are capable of making between ourselves and God. And it's always important for us to remember then this whole concept of recognizing the choices that we make between ourselves and God that make all the difference in the world, that we have the opportunities and we have this and outcomes which we cannot control. And this is important for us to recall and review, because we often will forget, if I'm afraid, that we do not really have this clear perspective if we suppose that we control these outcomes, these opportunities rather. They are given to you. They are given to you by the living God, and you were not there to make them happen. That's got divine sovereignty, the opportunities that come. Nor can you control the outcomes, you see. So it's really God's going to be the one who does that. And so it's really effectively then we see that if I kind of undo these in this way, it's really God in this way and God in this way. You and I then, DS stands for divine sovereignty. So we cannot control the outcomes. So this is why I like to say we're called to be faithful to the process and let loose of the ownership of the outcome, of the result. Very tough for men to do, because too many men, I fear, too many people find their joy in products rather than the process. And then they suppose they'll be content when they get what they're trying to achieve, but then they never live in the precious present of treasuring this day, not for an outcome, but for being alive to God in this day and taking the opportunities He grants us in this day that you cannot really be sure they will be, because each day is going to be different. We can't control an hour. So this is why I stress this component then, the stressing this idea of obedience to God, because this is where it all comes down. And even that then is a divine sovereignty, human responsibility idea, you see. Even that then is not only that we have a role, but also here too, we're still invited to be dependent upon God in all the things that we do in this day. So that's really my desire for you, would be that you would be a person who would walk in wisdom and reflect and have a sense of, where do I want to be in this world, and what are those looks that I want to take. So again, in looking at your own life journey, you want to see, we're called to have the backward look here. We have the upward and inward look, you see, and then you have the future look here. And it's in doing this, then we really recognize that our relationship with our God on the vertical level, and that's what defines the inward of the dynamic, our response to that relationship, that component there. And then how, as I look back, what were the sovereign foundations? What were the things that happened in my life journey? And this is where we have to be very careful, as I've said multiple times before. Beware lest you be defined by regret for lost goods or remorse for the terrible mistakes that we have made and the things wrongs that have been perpetrated on us. But instead, we're to remember this truth. We're no longer defined by the pain of our bounded past. We're being defined instead now in Christ by the joy of our unbounded future. So that the alchemy of grace will transmute even these painful things into the glory that awaits. And He won't waste suffering, and that He redeems what He allows, because the scriptures make it clear that He works all things together. How? For good to those who love Him and who are called according to His purpose. How He's going to do that is a great mysterious thing to me. I can't grasp it, but I have a greater and greater appreciation for the fact that I am in control of nothing. He's in control of all. And that therefore He's allowing, but He's going to redeem what He allows in ways I can't even begin to imagine. So the purposes of God will not be defeated, and we will end up then and walk in His joy. And so ultimately then, this will be our case. And all that is wrong will be purged at the Bema seat of Christ, and joy will continue forever. And so it's boundless joy. This is not what defines you anymore, this past. In fact, He's using this and transmuting this into the stuff of heaven. How can that be? I cannot begin to imagine, because it transcends my mind, my imagination in multiple ways. But those are thoughts then for you as we kind of reflect on this journey together of how Joshua reveals a lot of things for us that really are very meaningful, that are critical for us to grasp and to see in our life journeys together. Speaking of that life journey, I wanted to call your attention to something, if you haven't seen this, on the kenbo.org website. It is now on the home page, Living with Wisdom in a World That Has Lost It. And if anything, this is now really so essential to our purposes in this world, to really, again, recalibrate how this can be. So we're going to be renting the entire Cove facility near Asheville, North Carolina, Billy Graham Training Center. Beautiful place. And it'll be the whole place. And we're going to be having these various sessions. How does the Bible define wisdom? And how do we attain it? Because it's a world that's lost it, as I say. And then overview of Proverbs, life-transforming prayers, principles rather. And then besides Proverbs, then we a quick overview in another session of Job. And this is critical for us, learning the secret of obeying the one we cannot understand. You see that this whole response, we saw at the very end of our text this morning, it had to do with this idea in Joshua chapter 5 rather, going back to that for just a moment. Because in Joshua 5, we saw in the last verse, rather 4, I'm sorry, I meant to say 4, that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God. And so this whole idea of fearing the Lord our God is a critical motif for us to embrace. So as we see that, then we see what that looks like in terms of fearing him. You cannot understand him, but he transcends your imagination. The more you realize you can't understand anything in this created order, you're certainly not going to understand the mind of the Maker. But you then instead choose to obey him, and you discover that his obedience, the obedience to his purposes, which flows out of trust, which flows out of love, which flows out of knowing him personally, experientially, and relationally, that obedience will always enhance your journey, and you'll become to be rest in him. Though you can never understand him, you can rest in him and know him as a child of the living God. The Psalms, we're going to be looking at an overview of the wisdom and the Psalms, wisdom Psalms, Ecclesiastes, another section. And then my associate, Michael Stewart, will be doing an overview of wisdom in the New Testament, what we're calling the foolishness of God and the cross of Christ. And then living a life of truth, goodness, and beauty, created and redeemed to glorify God as living incarnations of his wisdom. And then another associate of mine, Glenn Sunshine, will be speaking and doing a special breakout session on critical theory, so critical race theory, and this whole area of postmodernity and what they get right and what they get disastrously wrong. So you have to have an understanding. There are insights that are valuable, but there are also serious flaws that bring us away from that fidelity to the truth. So that's my desire for you, is that you would be a person then for God's own possession, to know him, to know his peace that transcends all understanding, to be a person who comes to be shaped by the word, and whose life then, when in your life you choose then to allow yourself to be under the tutelage and under the discipline of the word of God. And the more you gain this wisdom, the more then you're able then through difficulties. Yes, it's hard earned, but we want to also learn and live, not just live and learn. But the more we do this, we become people who can be used in varying ways to comfort others with the comfort with which we've been comforted. Because no one gets away through this world without adversity. And the concept then, as we age, we discover these processes, but we have a wisdom that we can impart. And the wisdom of the sage that I fear has been lost so much in our own time. But I want us to become people who become growing manifestations of that eternal wisdom, which always treasures things according to their true value. Treating things according to their true value is the heart of wisdom. Treating the temporal as it really is, something that's going to be fleeting, evanescent, going to be gone. And treating the eternal, even though we can't see it, we don't actually have it yet we know that that's where we're going to be. So treating that, and not putting it off, but to treasure the things that matter most. So what we'll do is open it up for some questions and see what thoughts you might have.
Ken, Phil Smith.
Hey, Phil.
The last diagram that Ken used in the presentation with the arrows pointing in 4 directions, I think it's really powerful to map that diagram onto your metaphor of the eye of the hurricane.
Yeah.
And the idea is to stay in the eye, we need to keep moving. And as we keep moving, the future that we need to continue focusing on the future, which is ever changing. We continue to focus on the past, and then we need to also be aware of the upward and the internal examination. One of the things that helps to keep us in that eye.
I think that's a good way of seeing it too. Yes. And so I combine these two metaphors these days, it seems to me. I'm riding the thermals of the Spirit to stay in the eye of the hurricane. And so it's an interesting idea, because you see, you must be following the Spirit to stay in that centered place. And it's a centered place of peace and joy. It's a choice, as we've said before, that joy, that peace, that contentment are choices we make for this day. And as we do that, then we are fixed and firm in the promises and anchored in his promises. But at the same time, we are walking by the Spirit and allowing the Spirit to guide us, so that each day then, in spite of the adversities, and we are, and always have been, perhaps it's more obvious in some ways now, in a spiritual warfare. And those three warfare battlefronts have always been quite evident to us. And so we recognize there's an enormous dynamic in that spiritual warfare that we recognize has to be taken into account very seriously. And to see that apart from his power and grace, we would be totally vulnerable. So again, as we see that we can renew our minds with biblical truth and be defined not by the world, but by the word, that we can reckon ourselves as God has reckoned us, as people who are now alive to him and dead to sin. We are new creatures. And that furthermore, we can resist the devil by first of all submitting to God. Then it becomes, as Phil's describing here, a powerful way to recalibrate and to renew and to kind of reflect on where we have been and where we're going. Now, none of us knows how much time we have left. So it's wise for us to treat each day as if it was our last, because how can we be so presumptuous to suppose we even have another year? So the wise thing is then to live each day in light of that day, the day of Christ. But as we're seeing here, this kind of, I would like to become a daily exercise in a way, because although it can be in a very abbreviated form, this recalibrating process. And that's really actually part of the purpose of these renewal cards is precisely that recalibration is all in that. So, yeah.
Ben, can I ask a question?
Sure, you can. Yeah.
Frank,
yes.
I try to say every morning, this is the day the Lord's made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
Yes.
And there's more to it. This is the beginning of a new day. I've been given this day to use as I will.
Yeah.
I will use it for good, for I'm exchanging a day of life for it. Something I've exchanged for it. I want it to be good and not evil, success and not failure, gain and not loss, so that I might rejoice in the price I paid for it.
That's good, Frank. Where did you get that?
Some teacher, one of my kids had.
So it's very good, yeah. But I think that's a good affirmation, because you see, you're wisely saying that effectively you will give your life away for something. You're going to invest in something, but you'll never get this day back again. So you'll either squander it or you'll invest in it. So you're quite right, but you'll never get the day back again. So the wise thing is to see today as an opportunity. What if it was the last day of my life? How would I live it? So what are the things I'd treasure and value? You see, this is that's why it's a good prayer. And I like this also, so combining that with this before rising to bed. But that's very good. I like that, Frank.
Yeah. Carpe diem.
Carpe diem, that's right. Seize that day and use it wisely and well. It's one of the films that Frank knows that I've taught, the Dead Poets Society. It's the closest I've ever seen in getting adolescents to have a grasp of their mortality. It doesn't last long, but it's a powerful film. But the whole idea is we need to recognize and live this way as if it was our last day and treasure it, because living is so daily. You see, every day is a birth, growth, decay, and death. And then the next morning, arise, sleeper, and wake from the dead. So you have this daily cycle. And so,
Ken,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is David White. There's a a very similar prayer in the Valley of Vision, which you've referred to many times.
Yes.
A morning prayer that begins, Compassionate Lord, thy mercies have brought me to the dawn of another day. Vain will be its gift unless I grow in grace, increase in knowledge, ripen for spiritual harvest. Let me this day know thee as thou art, love thee supremely, serve thee wholly, admire thee fully. Through grace, let my will respond to thee, knowing that power to obey is not in me, but that thy free love alone enables me to serve thee.
Amen.
That's really good. Yes. Which one was that? Which one is that one called, by the way? I love this.
It's called Morning, and it's on page 216 in my copy of the Valley of Vision.
Okay, because I'm looking at mine here. Because I have a morning here. I was looking for it in the morning dedication. It's not that one though, is it?
No.
This isn't bad.
Keep going back.
Going back
Keep
here.
going back. It's another. Yeah.
Morning needs here. This is
there
the one.
It is.
Okay.
That's the one.
Yeah. So this is rich. So these are good exercises, aren't they? To use. Yeah. Yeah. Know you as you are. Love thee supremely and serve thee wholly and admire thee. This and then grace, let my will respond. So this whole idea is the realization of everything being dependent upon him, and that he's the one who's going to lead us and guide us throughout this day. This book, by the way, The Valley of Vision, if you don't have a copy, it's well worth acquiring because it's just very rich. Assailing foes. So it's a good way of actually having these prayers. Come with almighty power to cast them out, practically abolish every particle of. So many rich prayers. I by the way, it's another one I'd like to commend to your attention since we're in our Q&A modality, and it's this diary of private prayers I just had Pete Bodie get for me here, right here. And these prayers by John Bailey, for example, here are very rich. If I look at this one here, so this is a 30-day cycle here, and it's just terrific analysis. And this is an evening prayer here, and here's a morning prayer here. Give me meekness of bearing, charity, chastity, sincerity of speech. Just a rich array. We need resources to encourage us, and certainly things of this sort are very, very valuable. So it's a good thing to do. Yeah. What other questions?
Ken?
Yes.
This is Sheppel here.
Hey, Hal.
How you doing?
I am well, my friend. Always a pleasure to hear and see you. And
It's good to share you the pleasure's all mine. Ken, earlier in your lecture, in today's lecture, you mentioned the word transcendentals.
Yes, the transcendentals. Yes. And yes.
Could you comment about the emergence of that? What all took place when that became commonly used?
Yes. It's I don't know precisely when that phraseology was initiated, but when I speak of the transcendentals, I used to think about truth, goodness, and beauty, but now I do goodness first. These are qualities that I associate this especially with the work of the Father, and then I see the issue of truth. I associate that more with the ministry of the work of Christ, and then beauty with the Holy Spirit. But all three participate in all three, of course. But there is this notion here of recognizing there are some things that are transcendental, that point beyond themselves to some foundation of absolute that we admire and that we naturally wish or should be wishing to pursue. People know what goodness is. And this is why when I teach film, I'll often use beauty, though, to kind of sneak by their objections to bring them to a sense of goodness and then truth and pointing them to Jesus. But this whole idea that we all have a moral sense, and this sensus divinitatis, this sense of God, this as being people who are image bearers, as spiritual beings. We recognize them, we resonate because of that with the reality that God is good, and that we too, in this regard then, as image bearers, are moral beings, you see. So we have this understanding of that because we are moral beings. And that what we call morality is based upon an absolute, unfixed, unchanging standard that is necessary, and it's in the living God, so that we are moral, but we also are rational beings. And the basis for rationality is that we're derived from a great mind, not from chaos, but rather the effect can never be greater than the cause. Although people now are living in the rebellion against God as if that was possible. And then, because we are also aesthetic beings, we can appreciate these three. We can resonate with them. But they all point ultimately, though, to the wellspring of all that is. And that the majesty of God then is manifested in this way. And there needs to be an absolute for goodness, an absolute for truth, not some relative thing, and an absolute for beauty. And that's what we see in these transcendentals. So I've kind of been chewing on that because part of wisdom is to see, for example, truth and beauty and goodness, to see goodness and beauty and truth, and then to see goodness and truth and beauty. And we see all three together. So we are image bearers. We're fearfully and wonderfully made as image bearers of the living God. And so this is part of us in our nature, is that we have this capacity. One thing I would say with the idea of the image of God, because it's one of the things I'm working on here, is a book on the image of God. And the Imago Dei, and this is exactly what I've been describing here now. I'm going to change the order though. But you're a spiritual being, you're a relational being, and you're rational, moral, and good and aesthetic because God is so. You're derivative from Him. In addition, other aspects of the Imago Dei are there. You want to create. You're called to be. You're embedded in space and time and history. That you have aspirations and don't let those things die. You are nurturing. You're imaginative, you have authority, you're called to be receptive and so forth. All these things, we're amazing. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. I don't know if I'm overdoing it, but those are just some thoughts I've been having about this.
Hey, Ken.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ken, hey, John Fitz, good morning.
Hey, John. How are you doing?
Good. Well, earlier in this lesson, you mentioned, of course, the rocks being carried across the river.
Yes.
Does that have anything to do with the Jewish tradition of placing rocks on a grave?
It's a good question, and I haven't really looked into that, but I wouldn't wonder that it's certainly a memorial, isn't it? It's one of the most powerful things you see at the end of Schindler's List, when these people whose lives were saved effectively or because of his act, Schindler's Act, put those rocks on the tops of the stones. It is indeed this notion, I think, in Israel of a stone of remembrance, and perhaps that's what the idea is, an ebenezer, a stone of remembrance. But at any rate, the rocks that I'm describing here can be rocks of remembrance in your mind's eye. And what are the histories of your past? So it's always good, isn't it, to review God's faithfulness in the past. And it gives us a perspective, as His promises for the future give us a perspective for how do we live now in the present tense. But that's maybe, John, why don't you look that up for us and see if that's true. But I wouldn't doubt that that's a derivative from that idea of an Ebenezer, a stone of help, and a stone of remembrance. Because this notion of marking these so that when the next generation comes, what do these stones mean? You can tell them. So I think that's why in our kit, we're going to be talking about how you can actually write a legacy document. And these are the stones of remembrance in my life. And this is a way of kind of transmitting that to another generation.
Ken, when you speak about transmitting remembrances to the next generation, I think it's really important to put that in the context of what's happening in our current culture, the wisdom that this generation has lost. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's going on is a dramatic effort to rewrite history, to take down cultural memorials. Sure. And look to redefine the past in that process, somewhat reminiscent of what's done in the 1984 novel.
Well, I think that's right. It's just something that you see again and again with the whole idea of Huxley and these narratives that you have here with trying to find, for example, one place I put this, but this whole notion of just defeating or destroying or eliminating the past to get an insight then of how we are to live in this present tense. It's an interesting concept here. So Huxley anticipated that, and in a very real way, there is also this notion of I was trying to find it where I was looking for this, but I don't seem to be able to do that right now, unless it's this one. Yeah, I did find it. So here, to your point, Phil, who controls? This is from Orwell, but there's others as well. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. And so what you do is you deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. And so this is a remarkable thing that you can see that. And the interesting thing will be the further a society drifts from truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. So we're going to see a growing pushback. But these are the days that the Lord predicted. And frankly, we see these things coming. And we're seeing the signs, in my view, being this curtain being set for the next act. So we live and choose this way of recognizing, understand the time. There's a loss of this traditioning. There's a loss of that connection, a loss of history. In my own thinking, I combined these two novels, both 1984 and Brave New World, because it's a kind of a depressing thought, but there's a truth to that. When I think about 1984, I recognize that in a very real sense, we're moving in that direction, where it's Brave New World is really distraction, pleasure, and all these things. But then that creates the conditions for this. So that as I have come to see it now, this whole idea of a brave new world actually moves us into that next possibility. Then it's like this. So I've kind of begun to see that we're right on the cusp here of this 1984, and dumbing people down, mediaizing them into imbecility and so forth is a great vehicle then for actually diminishing their actual choices, and then there's an actual enslavement. There's perhaps a sense of prescience in both of them. But I think we're out of time. Chuck, you there? You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Ken. We want to encourage people that still have questions to hang in there with us. We'll be on until 8:15 with Ken. But Ken, want to thank you for your inspirational teaching, insightful teaching, really life-changing truths that you present to us. So thank you so much, brother.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
And I'm going to now call on Dick Doling if he'll close us out in prayer.
Thank you, Chuck. Heavenly Father, you have blessed us today through your servant Ken. We've learned more today about how we can be conformed to the image of your Son through the power of the Holy Spirit. Let us all here today know that we can always and everywhere commune with you by reading your word, by praying to you, and talking with you, and sharing everything in our lives with you. I ask that you, the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give to all of us the spirit of wisdom and of revelation in the knowledge of you. I pray that the eyes of our hearts may be enlightened, so that we will know what is the hope of your calling, what are the riches of the glories of your inheritance in the saints, and oh, what riches those are, and what is the surpassing greatness of your power toward us who believe. Amen.
Wonderful.
Dick, thank you for that very thoughtful prayer. And I wish everybody a good week and hope to see you next Wednesday morning. If you can hang in there with us, please do so.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken, thank you, Chuck.
Good
Thank
to be with
you.
you
Thank
today.
you, Dr. Ken.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you,
See you
Ken.
again on Friday.
Friday, good.
God,
God
yes. God bless America.
bless. Thank you, my friend. We're grateful.
Thank you. Thank you, Tobe.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Ken.
Good evening.
Ken, it's David again.
Yes.
As we were talking about the stone of remembrance, I kept on thinking about the hymn, "Come Thou Fount of Every
Yes.
Blessing,"
Oh, yes. Yes.
which in the second stanza says, "Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home." So, it talks right there in the middle of the hymn, an Ebenezer, as a remembrance of the help that God has given us to get here, and as hope to arrive at home and to the promised land.
That's a good word, yeah. And I still remember when I was a kid, what's an Ebenezer? And I didn't realize I'm raising an Ebenezer. I had no idea. And then you see how rich and powerful that is. Yeah. I'd love to hear you sing that. No, but I can't make you do that. You have such a great voice. But it does bring back that song. It brings it back. I hear it actually. Yeah, even now. Yeah, that's good. That's good. But I think this is a key theme that I think we fail to do. And that's why we're trying to write and create a guide, a toolkit to help people and really mark down those moments and even having some notes that they take. What were significant people, events, lessons over the years, and marking those down. You kind of build a spiritual history, a sacred history, don't you, of a memory of these stones that are along the way, and those connect together. And that's a nice way to see it as well, that those are markers in our lives. And I can review multiple such markers that come to my mind as I go through the journey of the years and what were marking moments. And I can just, and it's good to memorialize that. You don't want to forget. It's a big theme, isn't it? This whole theme of remembrance. Beware,
and sometimes
lest you forget.
Sometimes you remember them, you recognize them when you come upon them, but many times you don't realize until you look back on it. Their significance.
I think that's right. So we get a perspective and says, I see now a pattern I didn't see then. That often takes place. And so I think as we get more attuned to the Spirit's prompts and so forth, we begin to realize there's much more than we had known. And there's new layers, new insights, new perspectives. In my own journey, what's been interesting is we've been kind of organizing a lot of my resources here in my basement, stumbling across certain things that turned out to be great memorials and markers and reminders of things, I had forgotten this. And those are terrific opportunities to review and reflect and finding those things. So remembrances, don't forget what he has done in the past, you see, all that he has done for you. And to recall those things, review them. It's got to be intentional, I think. Otherwise, we forget. So it's a major theme, isn't it? To remember. Beware lest you forget, because when you forget, you get autonomous. You think that you're the one who did it. Yeah.
Ken, I have this, Bob Fryer.
Hey.
Just want to share. I have kind of a off sense of humor sometimes, but I have where I study, where I am right now. My study is, I call my Grateful Dead room. Because the past is dead, but I look around in my room and I have memories of, the past, my childhood, teenagehood, photos of families, books for personal reading and professional reading. And I'm just so grateful. And that's helped me every morning to see the Grateful Dead room.
I love that. That's new to me. So you're a deadhead. You're a deadhead, you see. I remember these people who would go to those concerts. But that's an intriguingly clever idea. I like the idea of actually having a shelf of remembrance. There's a kind of a creative dynamic, isn't there, where you actually had certain photos or images that are recollections, like little stones again, like an array of those things. That's a great creative thing, a deadhead. Yeah, Grateful Dead room. Because these were real. What's funny about memory, as you know, is that although we're highly selective in what we remember, the remembrance of the thing is the same as if it happened just yesterday. So I can still remember. I'll give you one example of such a moment, an experience. It was a cluster of such experiences when Karen and I were first married, and I was at Dallas Seminary. And we just didn't have much by way of resources. I worked these little part-time jobs as I could find them. But there'd be times when we were just totally out of money. And we didn't know what was going to happen, but we knew that we were there and that we were going to trust God. Only on those days when we literally had nothing to buy for food or anything, there'd be in my little mailbox, little boxes for each of the students would have his own little box. And I'd open it up and there'd be an envelope or maybe a $10 bill or a 20. And only on those times when that occurred, there was a period of time in the first 2 years where that occurred multiple times. And then when we had more stable jobs later on in seminary, that stopped. In other words, it was the Spirit of God saying, I'll take care of you. And that you took the risk of pursuing and I'm going to honor your risk. And I'm going to provide for you so that the one who is pursuing me, I will honor. So I look back at that as a memorial. And who were these anonymous benefactors? They're people who note that the Spirit of God evidently prompted them, and that's the only time when that money would be there, was just those times. So that reminds me then an array. It was one, but actually that happened about 20 different times, but in those first 2 years, amazing stuff. So it's good for you to summon up, isn't it? Things of that nature. Maybe you have a photograph that would use as a reminder, or any number of things. Some creative things you could do with that. Like that.
It's Bill Swain here.
Yeah, Bill.
The dichotomy of downsizing. When you start that process of getting ready to leave this world, it is heart-wrenching as you turn loose of things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of important things that are images and icons in our lives. And in fact, what we've been doing here is getting rid of a lot of stuff in the basement and going through things. And but then finding wonderful little treasures we'd forgotten. So the Spirit of God even uses that process. But all these are reminders of home. Hold everything with a loose grip, because you recognize, of course, that this is your...
He owns it all.
He owns it all. This is your condition. So you hold it with a loose grip. And as the saints in Hebrews chapter 11, it describes them, all these died in faith without receiving the promises. But having seen them and having welcomed them for their distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. In other words, God provided for them on this earthly journey, but that's not their home. This isn't where you get the promises. This is the place where you're being prepared. And this is, as I say, a soul-forming world where you're shaped by the adversities, but it's an alchemy of grace that God uses. But you're right. And so letting loose of things and to see fun things go is, it's a kind of a process of preparation in a way for that, the second womb, as you know, the second birth. In other words, just as we were in womb world and we were birthed into this world, or what we call death is a second birth canal to our true home. So holding things loosely and lightly, but holding fast onto the graces of God, clinging to that and realizing that we are pursuing a better country, a heavenly one. So this is really what we're looking for, a city that's not in this world. Because you see, if they'd been thinking about that from which they went out, they'd have had the opportunity to return. No, we burned our bridges and we realized we are pilgrims heading toward home. And with that pilgrim mindset, then I think you can hold the world's goods that God allows you to have with a loose grip. They've never been yours. They're there for a purpose. Hold them and use them wisely. And don't be defined by the temporal, but allow the eternal to transmute your use of the temporal. All these things are themes we have to remind ourselves and review. You're right.
Always remember your runway gets shorter every day.
And the runway gets shorter, yeah. And that's why I said, as I said before, age conspires with God to transfer our hope from the temporal to the eternal. That's what it's doing. And so it serves this purpose as a reminder. It's a negative sacrament. It's an outward invisible sign of an inward and invisible disgrace, the disgrace of the fall. And yet at the same time, in our new selves, in our resurrected selves, we will see that even now we are seated with him in the heavenly places. So then spirit, soul, and body, all will be made complete. It's a rather good word, isn't it? We don't look to this world as our home, but we see it as a vehicle and opportunity. But remember two things you'll never be able to do when you are home, when you are in the Father's house. You'll never again be able to help people who are in desperate need, number one. And number two, you'll never be able to share the gospel. So take advantage of that opportunity. While we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. And so each day matters and how you invest it. Everything matters this day. Yeah. So it's a good mindset to maintain and to review and to remind ourselves. So we encourage each other and stimulate one another to love and good deeds as we meet together in this context. And going back to Hebrews, of course, that's precisely the case. Because just before this text here, we see in chapter 10 that we are reminded to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. And so that we meet together, we journey together, we encourage one another. And here's the thing, all the more as you see the day drawing near. That window is very brief. And it'd be wise for us to live, as I say, to live as if this is your last year on this world, but to plan as if it's not. So you live in that tensioned interplay between the opportunities of the now and the aspirations for eternity. But to leverage this day, and what the Spirit brings in your mind and so forth. He's going to bring you opportunities, those kairos moments. And so my encouragement to all of you would be to walk by the Spirit. And again, as I used that metaphor before, ride on the thermals of the Spirit so that he keeps you right fixed and fast in that central place, that eye of the storm, where there is peace, that there is contentment, there is love, there's joy, there's gratitude. Choose this day, gratitude and contentment. In spite of the realities of what's going on in the world, you know who you are and where you're going. And that's an important perspective.